they repented of what they had done.
Okay. Well, let's define some terms here, and I think it's a good question, especially, let's say, for instance, people who made a mistake. We've been in this situation where we went to a congregation, and both the man and the woman had previous marriages, and they did not have a right to put away their spouse. Well, in that case, they're both in adultery, according to what Jesus taught. Can God forgive adultery? Yes. As a matter of fact, when we get to Matthew chapter 19, do you realize that it is not a command to put away your spouse if they're guilty of adultery? You can forgive them. But if they're not forgiven and they're put away, they're always a put away person. And a put away person, we will call the guilty party, can never remarry. Never. Never. And there are some instances, Kenneth, I've had preacher friends of mine in metropolitan areas where both the husband and wife, they weren't going to commit one to another. They're going to have what's called an open marriage. You know what that is, right, church? Yeah. See, even in that case, a husband does not have a right to give permission to his wife to be, right, unfaithful, nor does the wife have the authority to give the husband a right to be unfaithful. So in that case, if they do divorce, there's probably no innocent party. No innocent party. Jesus, when he dealt with in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9, remember verse 3, he was asked by unprincipled men, can a man put away his wife for any reason, any cause, right? And Jesus redefines what marriage is, right? Between a man and a woman, verse 6, joined together by God, verse 9. With the exception that, and we don't cause it, and our spouse becomes unfaithful, Jesus said, under that scenario, if they're unfaithful and we put them away, we can remarry, but we can only remarry a person who is eligible to marry. And under only that situation or in death.
There's a lot of people, though, not as innocent as they think they are.
That's true.
99%, about 95% of the time, they call stuff that makes them.
Oh, Gene, you're opening up a can of worms now, but it needs to be discussed. And we've actually run into brethren who have studied the matter, and they can lie about it too, but they're not going to lie before God because God does the joining. Hey, let's ask some real elementary questions. Well, I tell you what, we got folks out here, they don't know if they're male or female, right? Transgender, right? But does God join two women in matrimony or two men in matrimony? Or a whole lot of them together? No. He joins together a man and a woman, right? Who are eligible to marry, right? Isn't that right? Church? That's right. It's simple, isn't it? But people want to argue. Jesus said there's a certain classification of those who have committed adultery and were unrepentant and were put away, whether they be man or woman. You know, men don't have a corner on this too, brethren. So if the husband or wife have been put away, they're a put away person forever. Forever. That's what Jesus said.
You didn't answer Kenneth's question a while ago.
What's that?
He asked, like if a man and woman divorced,
Yep.
and they married somebody else, and maybe a couple times, once or twice, could they not get forgiveness and go back to the first spouse and be okay?
Okay, and you're talking about this would be a form of restitution or being reconciled one to another. Well, here's the problem with that. Then that gets into another question then. Let's say, for instance, a husband and wife are married, and let's say the husband decides to leave the wife and remarry. Or let's say both of them do. Well, they have put themselves, right, in a situation where they're committing porneia. Because even though the state might say they're married, in the eyes of God, they're committing porneia, right? So either of them could put them away. They are putting themselves in that state, right? So it gets into the matter. We'll discuss that in Matthew chapter 19 about this. There's some other matters we need to look into, But when we consider such things, we have to factor that in, so to speak. And secondly, this is the same thing. For instance, when we speak about marriages today. You know, a person can know God's law and mistreat their spouse. You know, a man could say, hey, if my wife becomes unfaithful to me, I can put her away and I can go marry Betty Jane over there, right? And, you know, because, you know, the pastor is always, or I should say, it's always greener at another pastor, right? But you know, if a person thinks like that and mistreats their spouse, and that spouse finds another man, I want to suggest to you that the husband is not innocent.
Or the woman, either one.
Or the woman. That's right. Very important. Very important. So there's more to it, and we'll discuss that more when we get into Matthew 19. Yes?
The answer to Ken's question in the Old Testament was Jeremiah chapter 3.
Okay.
It cannot happen.
Cannot happen.
If she goes out and be joined to another
man,
she's committed whoredom, he said.
Yep.
Shall she return? He says what Israel had done to
Yep.
God. He said, you've gone out and committed whoredom
Yep.
by disobeying me. Now you want to come back to me and everything will be just fine.
Yes.
He said, oh no, it's not going to work that way in marriage, for example, because if she's committed whoredom and if she wants to go back and take her original husband back, he said she's already soiled herself in the
Yes.
eyes because she can't do it.
Yes.
Now, you know, for the New Testament, I'm just saying that's what Jeremiah said.
Yeah.
Second observation, I think, is a bigger problem now that we exist now. Back 20 or 30 years ago, and I heard this statistic today, almost 80% of those who cohabitated about 30 years ago, they were married. They were married, whether they were legally married or illegally married in God's eyes or not. Most of the people who lived together in a family were married to one another, like I said, right or wrong. And now today, it's less than 50% of all of those who cohabitate are actually married, whether they have a right to be or not to be married. They're not married at all. And it raises a different can of worms, because you take some of these people who are just living together, and they've lived together and they've never been married to anybody else. Then they say, well, if we get tired of one another, we're not married, and then we've not committed fornication, so we'll just ask God to forgive us. Then we can both go out and marry now somebody else.
Yes.
And that's a real sticky situation.
Yeah, it's bad. And let's address one other thing that you brought up. I'm a little hesitant at bringing up analogies of the Old Testament, because you also had the Levirate marriage, right?
Sure.
You can't do that today, and that would be considered fornication, or I should say porneia or adultery. So yes, there are some questions along in Matthew 19, but again, in the principle, if a person is put away, according to what Jesus said, they're always a put away person. So some people ask the question, well, what happens if the spouse who put them away, they're unmarried? Can they remarry that person and say that person says, hey, you know, I really made a mistake? If they're a put away person, that person who put them away cannot remarry them, according to what Jesus said.
God established that permanent. And then when one does what we're talking about, then they dishonor the marriage.
Well, that gets into a matter again. God can forgive adultery, and the spouse can forgive the person for adultery. But if the person cannot forgive their spouse of adultery and put them away, and we're talking about somebody that did not cause that, that's all on their spouse. When they're put away, they're always put away, meaning they can never remarry. The innocent party can remarry, but only those that are eligible to marry.
And only in the Lord when a person dies, they can only marry.
We'll discuss that, and again, that's a good observation. And I really wasn't going to spend a great deal of time about also being a widow. That's also discussed as well. But when we get into Matthew chapter 19, maybe we can discuss this a little bit more. But it's very important as we ponder this. First and foremost, a lot of people go over here and they see this as a loophole of what Jesus taught. And it is not. and in the Bible. And I like the New King James. But those translators had no business of putting divorce for departing. And it's not metaphoric. There's no evidence, there's no conclusion based upon a preponderance of evidence to put that in there. Very important. And when it comes to this matter of not under bondage, this is not the marriage bond. This is my responsibility, first and foremost, to God. If I'm married to someone who is apostate or a non-believer, and they depart, and it's on them, I am not under slavery, I am not under bondage to go follow after them and to become apostate. This is what Paul is writing. I'm not talking about the marriage bond. Very important. Very important. Yes?
You know, you mentioned about the male with male, female with female.
Mm-hmm.
According to Romans 1, I believe that they know the condition they're in. And they know it's evil
Mm-hmm.
and against God's law, but
Mhm.
yet they are in it because of their lust.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not going to give it up, so God give them up.
I agree with you, Kenneth. I look at not only the Bible calls homosexuality, and that's two men or two women or whatever, something like that, an abomination, but it is also a form of rebellion. And it's called chic today, right? And we have basically tyranny from the White House, and we have tyranny from the judicial branch of these justices. They call themselves justices in these black robes. Isn't that right? And they legislate from the bench, where states have already had referendums about this, and not one of them said yes. It's a real problem. But you know, people are going to have their way and they're rebellious.
Trying to legalize it so they can satisfy their lust.
That's right. And the same thing with the lottery. It's an evil system. And you know what my brethren tell me from time to time? Oh, well, the state says it's all right. And therefore, if the state says it's all right, it's all right. No, it is not all right. And there'll be a day coming, and we don't live on this earth a whole long, do we, folks? Oh, man, I'm still not over the letter I got from the Social Security office telling me, you know, real soon, like, I can retire. Well, I don't like seeing stuff like that. You know, I like seeing stuff where, you know, I've got decades down the road, you know, and I'm young and what? No. You know, reality sets in. And some folks, reality hasn't set in. Isn't that right? We're not going to be here forever, and we're going to stand before God who makes these laws. And then what are we going to say if we're on the wrong side? We're trying to get people to get their head right and get on the correct side and get away from this foolishness. Not only this marriage foolishness, but this homosexuality, as we call it, sodomite madness. It's insane. But this is what people do. And brethren, we're having congregations now thinking about what are we going to do when two women or two men, you know, they want to be elders or something like this. Isn't this insane? It's crazy.
You know, Ken, addressing the homosexual issue, I mean, if you don't have any respect for God's authority, then whatever this God, whoever he is, says about it doesn't matter.
Yes.
And in the church, we've gotten caught up in this idea that we really don't respect God's law because,
That's right.
for example, just our everyday civil laws. I mean, there are people who speed like crazy, knowing they're speeding. It doesn't matter. It's okay. They run stop signs. They do everything else illegal because they don't have any respect for authority. If you don't have any respect for authority, period, then you have very little respect for yourself. If you don't have any respect for yourself, what's going to be your rule of authority? You don't have one other than how you feel. And they're going by how they feel. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father. It's of the world. But if you don't believe it, you just don't believe it, you know.
Well, you gone to meddling now, Jim. A lot of folks, they speed a little bit. Now, we're not asking for testimonies now, but some folks speed because they're in a hurry, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that right?
No respect for authority.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, I'd rather have that problem than folks can't figure out which bathroom to go to. Hello, somebody. Ain't that a problem? I'd rather have that problem.
Mine yesterday said ladies and gents, I didn't have a problem figuring it out.
And you know, Jim, of course, with the speeding problem, it's those folks with have the blue lights on that roof. Oh yeah, they'll help you with that problem now. So let's just keep the speed limit. And you're right, that's a root of problems. When people become lawless, they have no respect. And sometimes in churches, the same thing. And we actually put ourselves above God and legislate where He doesn't legislate.
Absolutely.
And that's a problem, isn't it? Marriage is an important subject, and it's going to determine if we're scripturally married, whether we're going to go to heaven or we're going to go to the hell fire. And again, we'll study this more in depth when it comes to those that are unscripturally married and put away can never remarry. And Paul did not make a loophole for them to remarry. Yes, no.
Okay, did I understand you right? Did you say someone could be guilty of making somebody, or maybe their partner, or that could be their partner, committed adultery and be held accountable for it?
No, I'm saying that a spouse can mistreat, for instance, a man can mistreat his wife, right? And his wife would not have a right, but let's say, for instance, she goes to another man and she commits adultery. What I'm saying is that that husband is not an innocent party because he caused that. So there are cases when it comes to marriage where both might not be innocent and might not be able to put one another away and remarry. That was my point.
Well, a partner,
Yes, and we'll get to that. Did I make that clear?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I was wondering if the innocent party would be accountable.
Well, they're not
causing
innocent.
them to do it.
If they're causing somebody to do something, like to commit adultery, the spouse is causing, say for instance, I just gave the example of the wife, that husband is not innocent.
So they're both guilty.
Well, both, he did not have a right to do that, nor did she have the right to become unfaithful. And in that case scenario, there's no innocent party. No innocent party. Even though the husband did not commit adultery, if he helped cause that, he's not innocent.
Knowingly caused it?
Yes.
Not knowingly caused it, either way?
Knowing he caused it.
Knowingly caused it.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry, Kenneth.
I'm just gonna make some comments.
Go for
The
it.
causing, well, a person can cause another to drift away by his actions and attitudes and words and so forth. Yeah, the way he treats.
Yeah, a husband, I use the term because men and women are a little bit different, right? Help me with this, church.
Yes, it's a lot different.
Well, we think a little differently, don't we?
Yeah.
Right? But there are also a lot of similarities. And a woman, I've actually had brethren tell me, this brother so-and-so, he wants to get out of his marriage. So somebody said, well, mistreat your wife. And then if she commits adultery on you, then you can put her away. Well, she committed adultery, which she had no business to do, because that's not a reason. But I'm using terms that we use often. But the husband is not an innocent party when he does that. If he withholds, remember we looked at 1 Corinthians 7. When it comes to the body, who has rights? The husband has rights to the wife, and the wife has rights to the husband, right? Isn't that right? And there's an equality there. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And he said, offer your wife due benevolence. I don't think he's talking about necessarily paying the light bill, is he? We understand this. But if a man mistreats his wife, that doesn't give her a right. But if that does occur, and she commits adultery, she's guilty of adultery, but he's also guilty of pushing her into that situation. And I'm saying he is not innocent. And he cannot say, I can put my wife away now, even though she committed adultery. And he might do it in secret, or only the wife, and that kind of thing. And he might seem, as my mother would say, just as American as apple pie, right? he is not an innocent party. He's not innocent. In that case scenario, neither could put away their spouse and remarry. Very important.
Well, it's just like many a wife say, hey, and it could be the other way, you know, I just couldn't live with him, no, he's a drunk. All he did was drink, 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 drink. Well, he paid the bill, yeah. Did he commit adultery? No.
Yeah.
He was just a drunk and I couldn't stand it anymore, so I put him away.
Mhm.
Well, you can divorce anybody for any cause, but the scripture in Matthew 19, plain, remarry.
Remarry.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
Anybody can put away any mate for any reason, any time, and still go to heaven, but you can't remarry somebody else and do it.
That's right.
That's the key figure there.
And it's unfair, right?
Yeah.
And I was going to say the same thing, you know, you ladies, you got troubles, right? Because women tell me when it comes to men, you can't live with them, you can't live without them, and you can't shoot them. That's kind of a quandary, isn't it?
Well, they do.
Well, some of them do, right?
Hire somebody else to do it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, we'll bring that up in a couple weeks, Lord willing. Next week, we'd like to discuss some of the claims that Islam has about Deuteronomy 18, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad. And after that, we'd like to study Matthew chapter 19. And again, marriage is an important subject, and I see a great deal of interest, and even at this moment in time.